I'm Steve Hatfield, and I teach jazz drum set at Wichita State University. In this video, I'm going to be offering suggestions on how to prepare the drum set audition material for the 2017 Kansas Area District and State Jazz Band. All of the music for this audition comes from this book, The Ultimate Drumset Reading Anthology by Steve Houghton. Now, there are 5 pieces from this book, as well as sight reading. For that reason, I have placed chapter markers in the description below. So let's begin with Basie Straight Ahead. This is a straight swing piece from the Count Basie library. Before we actually get into the song, though, it might be best to start with just some general considerations for playing jazz or swing on the drum set. Most notably, we want to make sure that the ride cymbal and the hi-hat stay sort of the hottest thing in the mix, and that whatever we do on the snare drum or bass drum generally stays under that a little bit. What we do on the snare drum or bass drum is what we would call comping, which is very similar to what the piano player or guitar player does, and that's just sort of improvising some syncopated little punctuations to help propel the time forward. So here's what that might sound like. Now, it's true that traditionally jazz drummers would play 4 quarter notes to the measure on the bass drum, what they call 4 on the floor. If you do that, it's very important that you play it super, super soft, what they call feathering the bass drum. Here's what that would sound like. You see my bass drum beater was just barely coming off the head there. And of course you would break away to play comping patterns or figures with the band. Now, having said that, I do think it's better to leave off the feathered bass drum or the 4 on the floor bass drum if you haven't really developed that technique yet. It's better to have that empty than to play it too loud. When you play it too loud, it's going to get in the way of the bass player. It's going to make the time feel sluggish. Better just to leave it out if you haven't really put the technique together for that. So, looking at the actual chart now, there are some kind of traditional things that drummers in the Count Basie band would do. For instance, at the beginning of a piece, very often there would be a piano solo accompanied by the bass and the guitar and the drums. Now, we could certainly play on the ride cymbal. In fact, I believe Harold Jones on the original recording of this does, I believe. However, a more traditional thing for a drummer in the Basie band to do would be to play on the closed hi-hat. And very often, they would actually hit the hi-hat stand on beats 2 and 4. If you play traditional grip, you would probably put your thumb and first finger on the cymbals and just kind of swing it in like that. If you play match grip, no big deal, you can just go to here. All right, so when we get to, so we might do that at the beginning. When we get to A, we probably move up to the ride cymbal. We can put a cross stick on 2 and 4, or maybe on just 4. When we get to C, you see we got some figures there. Now we can certainly do that. If so, you want to be careful. That's a tricky rhythm. It's sort of over the bar line. So I might play something like this. 1, 2, slow down. 1, 2, 3. Now you'll notice that 2 before D, rather than playing something like, I actually left that open and just played a slight 2 and 4 on the snare drum. I feel like that has a little bit more forward motion. It sounds a little less heavy-handed. Now, having said that, having gone through the figures there at letter C, if you're not really comfortable with that one, it would sound just fine to probably just play a nice solid beat, maybe even a slight 2 and 4 on the snare drum all the way through that. And as long as it sounds solid, people will just think you're being tasteful. Okay? So again, if it's better to play something that sounds really secure and it's going to really be have a good foundation to it than to play what you wish you could play and not be able to pull it off. All right, moving on, going to D, we might go back to the rim on 2 and 4, and then we'll set up E. We've got a big shout chorus. We could probably play fills through that, hit all those setups. Or again, we can just play like a nice strong beat with a slight 2 and 4 on the snare drum. And then we're done by the time we get to F for this particular audition. So we put all that together, and it might sound something like this.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, this is I'll Never Smile Again. This is a really, really slow, it's still a big band piece, so we do have some figures and the typical big band devices, but it is a very slow piece and a very pretty piece, so we want to be really careful how we approach some of these things. You'll notice at A that we have figures written all the way through the piece, basically. That does not necessarily mean that you're supposed to play all of them, especially in this case. That's just a cue to tell you what's going on, and then you can decide how much or how little to reinforce that with the band. On a piece like this, I want to play very, very simply and just keep the drive going and maybe just sort of hint at some of the figures. So at A, rather than doing something like this, 2, 3, 4, okay, that's a little much for this. So what I might do instead, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And so on. Probably even a little less than that, truth be told. Now, one other thing I would say about this piece is that it's very slow. And it's very tough to feel that space between notes. So what I want to do at a slow tempo is make sure I'm feeling some sort of undercurrent, some sort of subdivision of the beat. Maybe triplets, da 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 da, or even just do da do da do da do da do, something to kind of fill that space internally to where I can keep the energy going. That's one of the toughest things about playing a slow tempo, is still keeping the energy going without getting busy or getting too loud. And as far as, there probably are a few spots later on in the piece that would warrant maybe a nice fill, but just choose those moments carefully and judiciously. We want to make sure that we don't get in the way of this beautiful melody. So putting it all together, we have something like this.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, next up is Rio Rhythm. This is a samba, a Brazilian feel. It's not very fast though. It's maybe even closer to like a faster bossa nova. Just some general considerations here is we talked about balance between the different parts of the kit in a jazz feel. In this situation, we want to probably keep the hands, everything we do with our hands, to be about the same, kind of mezzo forte, mezzo piano-ish, depending. And we want to keep the bass drum under that a little bit. Actually, I like to keep the bass drum pretty soft. So here's an example of a feel that might work for this. 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so again, keeping the hands about the same, not as aggressive on the ride cymbal as I would be in a jazz situation, and then keeping the bass drum kind of soft under that. Other than that, this is pretty straight ahead. I would say at, starting on the second line, we have these figures. Bump, ba-da, bump, ba-da, da, da, ba, da, ba, da, ba, do, da. We might want to hint at that a little bit, but I wouldn't make too much out of it. I would try to do something more in the time. So rather than something like... Again, that's a little bit obtrusive. I might just want to do something kind of in the time feel itself. Okay, and again, if you're not really comfortable with the coordination or this style, just keeping the beat going through that would sound just fine as well. And then at B, we have some more figures, notably that half note on beat 2 of the second measure of B would be nice to hit. And then we go back to A after the B section, and we are done.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, so next up is Fall Leaves. This is a title obviously based on the jazz standard Autumn Leaves. And it shows that it's a hip-hop feel. I think what they're really trying to say is rather than straight eighth notes, this is sort of a halftime feel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think instead of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 or 1 and 2 and 3. So, as an example, straight. And I think what would fit this a little better is to swing, to lag those ands a little bit. Just a couple quick notes on a rock or funk or hip hop, whatever you want to call it, a backbeat sort of feel. In general, in jazz, we talked about how the ride cymbal and the hi-hat are sort of king, everything else supports that. In rock, we want to flip that around. The snare drum and the backbeat are sort of what runs the show, and everything we do on the hi-hat, or if we move up to the cymbal, needs to be supportive of that. If we play the hi-hat too loud, we may feel like we've got a really solid feel, but it's actually very top-heavy. Whereas if I just bring down the hi-hat, then to me that feels a lot more solid. Just a general note, you see that I play my stick backwards a lot when I play anything with a backbeat. It's just a habit. There's no magic to it. You don't need to do it. All right, so getting back to the piece itself, The tendency here, since most of you are probably pretty comfortable playing a rock feel, is going to be probably to overplay this. Start with a really foundational beat. Try to create a part that actually works with the song. And then, yes, there are plenty of kicks and things that you can help with throughout the piece. But in general, I might suggest you try the chart just playing a really simple beat at first. And then see what needs to be changed. See if we need to find some figures to hit, if we can support it. There are some stops on the B section, and just some syncopated hits here and there that would be nice if you could do it. But again, like we've been saying all through this process, better to play something really simple and solid and show that you can support the band than to play something really busy that's out of time and maybe not stylistically correct. So if we put that together, we get something that sounds like this.
A 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3.
Finally, Voyage Home. This is based on the Herbie Hancock classic song Maiden Voyage, with Tony Williams playing drums on it. This is a tricky feel. Some people call this an ECM style, which comes from a record label, ECM, that had a lot of artists that would play this type of a feel. Some people also just call it a straight eighth. And the trick is, it's a straight eighth note feel, like rock or bossa nova, but it's not rock or bossa nova. In fact, you really don't get into a pattern very much. It's almost more like a kind of a modern jazz feel, but instead of swinging, it's straight. So something like this, maybe. So the piece itself is very similar to Maiden Voyage. I really suggest that you go and check that out. And also, as always, with all these pieces, make sure you listen to Steve Houghton playing them on the recording. You can't go wrong with that. There's a vamp at the beginning. A vamp means just something that's in the real world would be repeated over and over again until somebody's ready to move on. In this case, I believe they do the first two bars 4 times, then they move on. And on that intro, you'll notice that Steve Houghton plays, he does play more of a pattern. He actually plays cross stick on all 4 beats while kind of playing the ride cymbal and the bass drum off of what the bass part is. So he plays something like this, 2, 3, 4. Which is kind of nice. That kind of sets up there's a nice suspended feel by the bass player. So this is it's kind of a nice tension that gets built that way. When we get into the next section, starting on the 3rd bar where you see the sign there, you can break away from more of this loose ECM style, or and you can do that on the rim, or which I think is what Steve does on there, or you can do on the snare drum a little bit too. You probably find that you don't have to play as much as you think you do. Space is a nice thing. And on the recording, I believe it's right on the 3rd line where you can see the chords moving every 2 beats. It might be nice to actually kind of go into a bossa nova pattern there, because the bass part kind of suggests that. So you might actually sit into a pattern warp. And then you notice there's some figures there in the first ending that might be nice if you hit that too, subtly. And that's actually it. That's all we play of that one.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Thanks for watching. If you have any further questions on this material or would like to know more about studying jazz at Wichita State University, feel free to get a hold of me at steven.hatfield@wichita.edu. Thanks again, and best of luck with the audition.